This is Dina. Welcome to the Den. I'm doing something a little different this time in that I'm covering a game that, while old, is actually new to me. With the exception of the newer Silent Hill games, I wouldn't normally do that, but after a few people recommended it, I played a PC point-and-click adventure game from the 90s called I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, and I found myself really getting into it.
Which of you five would like to play my little game?
I had originally heard of it through TV Tropes. As some of you may know, I am a big TV Tropes whore. In fact, just for shits and giggles, let's have a counter for every time I reference a trope in this video. Anyway, one entry in particular that really got my attention is called And I Must Scream. Obviously named after the story that this game is based on. The idea is, well, fairly obvious. You would be screaming because you're in pain or anguish, but you can't because you have no mouth. As a trope, it's not always that specific. Another example is being buried alive. Sure, you have a mouth and you can technically scream, but no one would hear it, dooming you to a long and lonely death. And that's assuming that you're not immortal. It's a very long page, and I was up until the wee hours horrifying myself with it, then hardly able to sleep that night. It's good stuff, though. If you have the stomach for it, I do recommend reading it. The literature section is especially creative with all the horrific things that can happen to characters, especially in sci-fi where just about anything goes. Some sci-fi writers are real sickos. That said, needing to scream but lacking the mouth with which to do so actually has fuck all to do with the bulk of this game and the story it was based on. Let me back up. I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream was a short story written by Harlan Ellison back in 1967. Now, I'm not much of a reader and I don't know much about him, but he seems pretty awesome.
As long as you can blame everything on some unseen deity, you don't ever have to be responsible for your own behavior. And I think that is the ultimate mark of humanity.
If a little intimidating, from what I've heard. He wrote a few episodes of The Outer Limits, along with a Star Trek episode called The City on the Edge of Forever. Wait, which one was that again?
I'm in love with Edith Keeler. Edith Keeler must die.
Holy crap, he wrote that one? The more I learn about this guy, the more impressed I am. But anyway, back to No Mouth. It takes place in a post-apocalyptic future. AM is a supercomputer that became self-aware and went insane, destroying nearly all of humanity. A bit like Skynet, but unlike in Terminator, the humans didn't have the chance to fight back, they were just screwed. Speaking of the Terminator, apparently it's a ripoff of those two Outer Limits episodes that Harlan Ellison wrote, which caused a big old kerfuffle. I don't know if Skynet is based off of AM or not. But after reading about the other parts of Terminator that are ripoffs of his other works, the similarity makes me wonder. I just might have to make a video about that. Like most of my generation, I adore Terminator 2, so it could happen. Then again, the idea of a supercomputer becoming sentient and trying to kill its creators has been done in other places too. The most obvious example is 2001 with HAL.
What's the problem?
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
What are you talking about, Hal?
Which I actually have not seen all of. I really need to remedy that. Hell, even Red Dwarf did something similar in Season 10 with Pre.
JMC policy dictates the ship should dispose of itself by flying straight into the nearest sun.
What about us? Never mind us, what about me?
But Am's actions are a little more extreme. He keeps 5 people alive and proceeds to torture them for 109 years. This isn't your everyday adult horror. This is grand-scale cosmic horror, end-of-the-world stuff. Am is like a vengeful god, and they are in his world, completely at his mercy, of which he has none. They are as helpless and screwed as they can possibly be. The short story has the 5 of them going on a journey to a cave where they are led to believe there is canned food, and, well, I recommend reading the story.
There was light filtering down from above, and we realized we must be very near the surface, but we didn't try to crawl up to see. There was virtually nothing out there. Had been nothing that could be considered anything for over 100 years. Only the blasted skin of what had once been the home of billions. Now, there were only 5 of us. Down here, inside, alone with Am.
Actually, I take that back. What I really recommend is listening to the audiobook read by Harlan Ellison.
It was light, that sound. Half sound and half light, something that began to glow from Benny's eyes and pulse with growing loudness, dim sonorities that grew more gigantic and brighter as the light sound increased in tempo. It must have been painful, and the pain must have been increasing with the boldness of the light, the rising volume of the sound, because Benny began to mewl like a wounded animal.
I read this story and thought it was interesting, but it wasn't until I heard it in his voice that I really appreciated it.
Hate
Let me tell you how much I've come to hate you since I began to live.
In 1995, Harlan Ellison co-authored the script for the video game and scripted most of the dialogue. Oh, and he provided the voice of Am. I cannot think of a better choice.
And I began feeding all the killing data until everyone was dead, except for the 5 of you.
A big difference between the original story and the game is that the game expands on everything. The characters are much more fleshed out. The original story was narrated by Ted.
Ted!
But other than that, each character only had a few lines of dialogue. In the game, each character has his or her own scenario, and you get to learn about the character's past and personality. Every single one of these characters has some kind of fatal flaw which Am has been exploiting, and once you understand that flaw, you can help your character overcome it and beat the scenario. And in the end, you have the chance to take control of Am, and even Am is fleshed out in a way. We come to understand his various components, how they work, and how they can be exploited. So as nihilistic as this story is, you can technically beat the game. Harlan Ellison wanted it to be unbeatable, but fortunately that was not the final outcome. Failure is not the only option. Although you're limited in how happy of an ending you can get, considering you're one of only 5 humans left in the world and you're trapped underground. So like I said, there are 5 characters. Gorister, who is suicidal, Ellen, who is perpetually held back by irrational fears, Benny, who is generally selfish and obsessed with food, Nimdok, who doesn't remember his past due to being senile. Also, it should be pointed out that he's a very old German scientist. Yeah. And finally Ted, who is a paranoid narcissist. When I first started up the game, I wasn't sure if I was gonna like it. It starts off with some very hammy monologuing by Am.
For you, hate.
But you know what? He's insane and has a god complex. It makes sense that he'd be theatrical.
How are things in the pastry core, Nimdok? Tell me again how you saw the smoke from the furnaces, and you thought they might be roasting chickens.
It also didn't help that I started with Ellen, who... First of all, she's awfully sassy for someone who has been tortured for 109 years.
Snap, crackle, pop. Must be a glitch in the circuitry.
In reality, torture tends to mess with a person's head. It takes away their humanity and leaves them an empty shell.
You'll never get laid with that line of stuff, Anubis. Take care of your own boring self. Bye now.
She acts like she just rolled out of bed one day and decided to go on this adventure, and not so much that she was getting a brief reprieve from being stuffed into a small box. She's also a stereotypical jive-talking black woman, which is sometimes cute, but usually kind of annoying.
Mother ugly machine. This Am sucker needs intensive therapy.
And there are other things about her that bug me a bit. So I'm not overly fond of Ellen, which sucks, because normally I want to like that one lone female character, but not so much this time. Oh well. But the more I played the game, the more I liked it overall. The rest of the characters act a little more naturally, particularly Gorister. I actually can believe that this guy's been in hell for 109 years.
Probably wants me to jump overboard. And into what? A sea of razor blades? Painful, but not deadly.
I will go into the characters more in part 2. I just wanted to point out that the first ones I was exposed to didn't make the best first impression on me, which is about the only bad thing I have to say about this game, so I wanted to get that out of the way. On the upside, it's very psychological kind of horror, not unlike Silent Hill, despite the fact that it came out 4 years earlier. It approaches it a bit differently, but it's still character-driven, and it's all about peeling back the layers and discovering what makes these characters tick. And while the general plot of the game is very sci-fi and cosmic horror-ish, there's actually a lot of adult horror when you get into the characters' pasts and personalities. I can't really tell you if this is a good game as far as point-and-click adventure games go, because I haven't really played very many. I mostly played this game for the story. I wasn't that great at finding objects that needed to be found, and I ended up using GameFAQs a lot. The downside to using an FAQ is that you can tear through this game really quickly, and if you actually paid for it, it might feel like a waste of money. But since it's only $6 on either Steam or GOG.com, I still think it's worth playing even if you have to go that route. I really want to analyze this game, so in part 2 I'm going to go all out and spoil the hell out of it. So if you haven't played this game yet and you have any interest in it, you can go and play it before watching part 2. In other words... Still time! Yeah, I usually reserve that for Silent Hill games, but what the hell, close enough. See you in part 2.